I study information systems use. So I'm an associate professor at HSM Montreal. I was trained as a computer scientist, and then I did my PhD in information systems at McGill. So basically, all along my PhD, my doctoral work, and then as a junior professor, what interests me, and it has interested me, is how do technologies get accepted and get used in organizations. So probably because of that focus, Pierre Majoric said, well, the guy probably has something relevant to say with regards to the adoption of AI-based applications in organizations. So that's why I'm here. More specifically, what about ISUs? The work that I do is both at the individual level and collective level. So collective level is use of technology in organizations by teams, for instance, teams of employees, multiple people. I do have a couple of publications on the subject. So essentially in one of them, I'm looking at different patterns of use of enterprise applications in organizations, and to say, well, how many distinct patterns of use there are, because if we understand how many distinct patterns of use of technology we have in companies, maybe we'll be able to more adequately manage each type based on its key characteristics. I also have a paper essentially on, again, collective use of social media, and how that use enables grassroots activists to organize as a result of industrial crises. So essentially, we had data collected from social media, from Twitter in particular, in relation to the BP oil spill in 2010, 2011 in the Gulf of Mexico. So we had a look at how do grassroots activists use social media to organize and respond to that crisis. So either to clean up beaches, save birds, animals that were affected by the oil spill, boycott BP, and so on. So we had a look at the communication patterns. I'm also interested in the and I'm currently doing some work on IT development, so software development. Given my background in computer science, it's not a surprise that I'm interested in the software development process. And I'm looking at software development done in open source communities. So it's essentially volunteers that work on particular projects as part of these online communities that are hosted mostly on GitHub. And one phenomenon that interests me in that context is the phenomenon of forking. So forking, what it means is that it could be individuals that make copies of the code base to start their own projects, or maybe you fork or you create a copy in order to create a bug fix or implement new functionality. And I'm interested in, again, how many types of forks there are in practice, and what is their impact on the sustainability of the software development project? Because a few forks here and there, forks that develop functionality that contribute that functionality back to the originating project, maybe it helps the project. It fosters innovation, exchange, creative tensions. If you have forks that essentially split, create parallel functionalities, they never contribute back, that could actually backfire in terms of the sustainability of the originating project, because obviously it splits the attention of the developer base and the eventual users of these open source applications. So that's it. So essentially, it's especially with regards to this research project, I think it's the research I do on software development and acceptance and use that is most relevant. That's $1 million question. Look, I would rephrase the question. I would say, why is AI important in my field of research? What attracts me to AI? I'm coming back to the responsible part in a second. I see these AI-based applications as yet another technology in a wave of technologies that have been created, put in place, and eventually adopted in organizations and society. I mean, if we look at technology in organizations, we had decision support systems in the 1980s. We had ERPs and CRMs, customer relationship management software, back in the 90s. We had platform-based type applications and social media applications more recently, all right? So AI-based applications is just, I look at it as just another technological wave that is about to wash over us. So from that perspective, we have, especially in information systems, in business schools, we have done research over the past 30 years on what drives the acceptance and use, initial use, continued use of any sort of technologies in organizational contexts. So the way I look at this question, you know, what is my perspective on AI within my field of expertise, is to say, well, AI is just another technological artifact. And if I am to understand how is AI going to be accepted and used in organizations, it may be worthwhile to compare and contrast it to previous types of technologies. Because for previous types of technologies, we know that perceived usefulness is a driver for acceptance and use. Perceived ease of use, because the easier it is, so the lower the mental and physical effort to interact with the technology, the more likely you are to give it a shot. I'm talking here about initial use. We know that self-efficacy is a driver for initial use. So the feeling that you have seen this sort of beast before, you manage to use it in your day-to-day job, so you're willing to try it, right? At least once. Involvement and participation. So essentially, if you were playing the role of a champion, if you were playing the role of a super user, if you were playing the role of a developer on some of these applications, so in other words, you have developed some sort of involvement with the application, or you have some skin in the game, so to speak, you are more likely to use it. Satisfaction with use will drive continued use. We know that from previous research. We know that habits, especially in an organizational context, habits develop. So we're not talking about habits driving your initial use, obviously, but habits will drive your continued use for various reasons. Emotions. There has been research that shows that emotions play a role in driving continued use of technology in organizations. Addiction. More recently, I have a paper that's recently been accepted to a pretty good journal that talks about the process of developing an IT addiction to hedonic technologies. All right, so hedonic technologies are social media platforms, games, those kind of things. So in case you haven't watched the Netflix documentary on the social dilemma, excellent documentary. I strongly recommend watching it. So addiction is going to drive continued use. It's not going to be a rational use, but it's going to be driven by a compulsive behavior, and some would say chemical changes, in particular brain receptors. Well, so there's a lot we already know about initial use and continued use of technology. My interest is, with regards to this project, to have a closer look at what are the key characteristics of AI-based applications, and to compare and contrast them with previous technologies. And based on this comparison, to actually be able to say some of the previous knowledge we have developed still applies, or it doesn't apply for these reasons, and we need new tricks, new ways to facilitate the acceptance and use of these AI-based applications. But I'm not willing to throw out every. I mean, this issue of adoption, this issue of acceptance and use, it's present. It's definitely a gap. It's one of the things that Ivado has observed, the fact that these tools have been developed, but they have not been yet used in a widespread fashion. Why is that? So I think that's definitely a gap that certainly this research aims to fill, that myself I have a particular interest in. I would like to go back to your second question when you said responsible AI, and I said I'm going to remove the responsible and I'll come back to it.
Go for it.
We talk about responsible and ethical AI. And to me, one gap is these are relevant questions. But the bigger question to me, at least, is why didn't we ask to have responsible and ethical ERP systems 20 years ago? Why didn't we ask to have responsible and ethical social media 10, 15 years ago? And God knows, looking at the horror stories that happen these days on Twitter and Instagram and all these platforms, we probably should have had that discussion. What is it about AI-based applications that has triggered that recognition and that well-earned interest in it to be ethically developed, deployed, and responsibly used? All right, what is it? It must be, look, I haven't done the research, so I don't know. It's just a hunch. But there must be something in the key characteristics of an AI-based application that made it such that these questions have come to the fore right now. And the reason why it would be interesting to know what are these key characteristics that have triggered this, in French, Christian hobbies. I like to eat, very much I like to eat, but I don't cook, which means I eat out a lot. In this day and age, that has been curtailed for about the past 2 years with the lockouts and whatnot. I have subscriptions to the opera and to museums. Yet again, these are activities that over the past 2 years have been put on ice for a while. I'm no longer playing soccer and I'm no longer playing tennis, but I now enjoy watching both. So maybe that qualifies as well as hobbies, not in the sense that I'm actively involved in them, but in the sense that I'm actively watching when I have a chance, soccer and tennis, and in particular soccer, not all soccer, but Arsenal soccer. So from the Premier League in Britain, I've been watching Arsenal games now for